I'm Matt Cherry. I'm an international representative for the IHEU, and I have previously worked for national humanist organizations in the UK and in the USA. And I have a number of responsibilities for the IHEU, including marketing and media outreach and public relations, which I will discuss later. I also represent the IHEU at the United Nations in New York. I'm the head of the IHEU delegation there and have a number of activities working within the UN. And in both of these areas, I have to focus on representing IHEU policies, so I think that's why I'm taking part in this session with you all today.
And you're also working with, as an advisor in media relationship for the time we are not working for IHEU, so that's very relevant for us as well. There are IHEU statements. It's a very unclear thing. We don't have anything saying that, but we have a lot of different kind of statements that are made over more than the 60 years that the organization has been in existence. And the kind of statements we are talking about are made by different bodies of the organization. And of course, the superior body is the General Assembly, and that's the body that can actually say something that is legally binding, that this is really what we mean. And General Assemblies usually do make some kind of resolutions or declarations or other kind of decisions that is part of the thing that IHEU has some kind of opinion about. But also the executive committee can do that between the General Assemblies. So they can make statements, they can send out information, we put up information on our website, and so forth. And of course, congresses also make resolutions on specific issues. And the mechanism that we use in IHEU is that congresses often make decisions or resolutions on specific topics that are relevant to the Congress theme. And then at the General Assembly, following the Congress, the General Assembly decides whether to adopt those resolutions also as official resolutions for the organization itself, not only for the Congress. So sometimes the Congress can make a statement on something that they think are very relevant for their context and for the Congress situation, but it's not necessarily anything we would like to have as a permanent policy or as a permanent resolution in IHEU, so it may not be adopted by the General Assembly as such. So we have different levels of statements that are available. Many of them are available on the website. Most of these statements are still very relevant, but we know that a few of them are outdated and not relevant anymore. And some are actually have been replaced by newer ones or been superseded by new statements without the old one being taken out or removed. So there is some kind of difficulty about that. 2 years ago, the IHEU made some major changes to the bylaws and the internal rules that regulate how our organization is working. And after that, we found out that the next step for us would be to actually go through all the statements we have made through the years and see if there were anyone who was old enough or wasn't relevant anymore that should be thrown out. And maybe there also was some kind of area of statements or area of policy where we actually didn't have any kind of resolution or statement. So the executive summer a policy commission, a group of people that will go through all the statements that have been made through these 60 years and try to sort out which ones are still relevant, which ones do we want to use and propose and promote, and which one do we want to get rid of. And then the Executive Committee and the General Assembly will have to make decisions on that later on. Maybe next year, maybe in 2 years' time, it will take some time. And maybe the General Assembly then will have to make some new resolutions and new policy. And the point is that when you are making that kind of statements, sometimes in very specific contexts, something has happened and you make a statement or policy, about a resolution about that. It's very easy to make it so specific for that problem, that case, that it's very difficult to use it for other similar circumstances later on. So you want that kind of policy statements or resolutions to be general enough so that they can be applied in other contexts. But sometimes that makes it difficult because it isn't relevant, not enough or precise enough for the specific situation when it was needed. So that's a balance between addressing a specific problem at a specific time and then making some kind of statement which is a more general policy over time. And that's something that you will meet in your organizations as well. That's something you said 5 years ago, 10 years ago, was perhaps very good and very relevant at the time, but doesn't really fit the situation anymore. And then you will have to do something about that and replace them and make something new. And I think that you have even more experience with me or tradition with me for the IHEU statements. So would you like to fill in a bit more about the processes and things, how we do make resolutions, how we make statements about this?
Sure. I actually want to make another comment first. I have to admit to a certain schizophrenia because my academic training, and in many ways my inclination is as a philosopher, and I have a degree in philosophy, but my professional career, a lot of it has been in public relations and media. And really those two approaches are quite antagonistic in many ways. And I think those two approaches apply to a lot of the process of making policy through humanist groups. Humanist groups often want to have policies on everything and discuss all of these philosophical issues and solve the world's problems. But when it comes to communications, that's not really what you need. And it's good to have the overarching philosophy from which you draw particular responses and particular positions. And we have that in the humanist philosophy, and I think we all share some of those common principles, such as not believing in God, relying on reason and evidence, support for human rights and democracy. And we can draw on those to come up with specific responses, but it doesn't mean we have to sit down and work out a response to everything. So when you're developing statements or resolutions, keep in mind the function that you're trying to fulfill by doing that. Don't just do it for the sake of having a policy. Work out what your needs are and what your audience will be. And I think a lot of that will actually determine how you do it. Roar mentioned when you respond to a specific issue, you may come up with a very specific statement. And I think that's okay for a press release, for example. That's what should be in a press release. You want a very short, pithy, memorable quote giving your position. But that will not be appropriate for a long-term policy. So sometimes you just need to work out the function that you're trying to fulfill. And you can have different vehicles to reach those different goals. So you can have a quick press release for one thing and a long-term policy. Talking about the IHEU statement, go ahead.
I can just give one example of what you mentioned just now. Because we have, on the Congress in two days' time, we will propose a resolution on peace. It's called the Oslo Declaration on Humanism and Peace, Oslo Declaration on Peace. And it has been, we have been thinking about that for a year. And it's definitely relevant. But of course, because of the terrorist attacks on 22nd of July, it would be very relevant for us now to actually put in something in that declaration about that, the things that happen here. But and that would seem to be right for us now in this instance. But then again, in 2 years' time or in 5 years' time, that would actually make that declaration less useful for us because it's so situation located. So if we are going to say something about that, the terrorist attacks, we have to do that as a separate issue and not confuse it with the general policy on peace. So that's just one example of how the specific surroundings or situation when you are in can confuse your long-term policy-making things.
Okay, so what do you want me to speak about, Rob?
Would you say anything more about how we achieve policies, how we develop policies?
Right, well, as you know, the IHEU is a democratic organization whose democratic members are themselves organizations. So we have a General Assembly made up of representatives of our member organizations. And our policies are generally proposed by member organizations and put to our General Assembly. I won't go into we have an executive committee that also may take a role in that. But our overall policies have been decided by the world humanist community. And I think there's a value in referring to those. If your organization does not have a policy on a particular issue, you may want to look at what the IHEU has said on that, if indeed we have said anything, and use that as a reference point. You may even just say, this is what the international humanist community says on this issue, or you may use that as a basis to adapt it to your local needs. And as Rob said, all of those things can be found on our website. And I should add, since you are representatives of member organizations, if there are issues you feel the IHEU should have a policy on and doesn't, then you have the right to submit a resolution for the IHEU to consider and to adopt after a vote.
Thanks. And you can understand then that during 60 years you really make statements on a lot of issues. So the policy commission that we made a year ago has then gone through all the different kind of statements that we have made. And they have grouped them into several groups and said, these are the things that we have said something about. And then they will go through each of these section by section and see whether things are still relevant or not. And these are the 13 different groups of things that the IHEU has said something about at one time or another. And as you can see, yes, we say much about quite a lot of different things. And maybe we shouldn't have made statements on so many different issues. If you remember, one of the points I made when I was discussing this morning about the different kinds of organizations we are and what should be really our specialty, it should be something that other organizations don't do, because we are specifically non-religious, non-theistic. And if you address all these kinds of areas with that viewpoint or that angle on your statements, it could be right. But if it's just a general point of view in many of these areas, it could just as well have been made by some other organization. And you can say, yes, we support the resolution by the Red Cross, or by this institute, or by this human rights group, or by Amnesty, or whatever. We don't have to develop our own. So, of course, the statements on humanism, rationalism, atheism, and free thought, that's definitely our core business. There's no doubt about that. And religion, religious privilege, secularism, and separation of religion and state, definitely our kind of area. That this is what we are working with. And we are supporting any and all work being done to criticize religious privilege and to achieve separation of religion and state, or church and state. So that's definitely. And many of our groups, and sometimes also the IHEU, takes up questions about human dignity and autonomy, end-of-life issues, euthanasia and abortion. And sometimes we have been quite early adopters of this, so that actually the international group, IHEU, is a bit in front of many of the national organizations themselves. But usually it's perhaps the other way around, that this is discussed in many of the national organizations, and when a large number of them has achieved some kind of consensus on an item, then it's also developed as an official IHEU policy. But sometimes it's the other way around. And then human development, poverty, work, health, education and development assistance. Those are fairly general items, general issues. But there can be specific problems related to non-religious people in that area, especially education, where we had a lot of different problems. But also about work permits, things like that. In Norway we have had this problem about you cannot become a graveyard digger unless you are a member of the state church. It's ridiculous. There shouldn't be any problem with that, but because it's organized by the church, then you have to be loyal to church things. So that's some kind of work issue, work permit issue. Freedom of opinion, expression and religion or belief, definitely our thing, our area. Science and education, absolutely. And then the environment, pollution, resource depletion and climate change, yes. Some of our groups say that we cannot only be responsible for human beings, we have to be responsible for animals and the entire ecosystem that our world is. So we have to do something in this area as well. And it's definitely something that each group has to discuss and make up an opinion about how far they can go or how much time and resources they have to go into this. And some groups say that yes, we will absolutely use some time and resources on this. But for others, they say that no, we have other problems that are much more pressing, so we cannot take much time or much resources to discuss this and work on this, so we have to prioritize. Rule of law, crime and punishment, torture and the death penalty. Yes, there's no doubt that rule of law is something that is actually useful for us when we are discussing human rights and equal treatment of all people in a society. Crime and punishment, torture, death penalty, it's much about human behavior and how the laws and regulations of each country are addressing those kind of problems. And it's natural for us to want to engage in that as persons. But it's not quite as obvious that we as groups should engage in the same. And we have a very good research on that from Norway. I think it's now 20 years ago, maybe 25. But we made a research trying to find out how many people who were members of the Humanist Association who were also engaged in other organizations like the Amnesty, like the Red Cross, like other organizations. And we found that, compared that to the general population of Norway, and we found that among humanists, more people were members of the Amnesty International than in the population in general. So that meant that quite a bit of our members were interested in the problems of torture and imprisonment of people, and they worked for that inside Amnesty International and not necessarily inside the humanist organization. So that's also one way to say that, yes, I as a person can be interested in this, but I don't necessarily have to do everything through the humanist organization. Discrimination is definitely something that we meet quite often, and for us it's religious discrimination that is the #1 priority, of course, and also then the discrimination of non-religious, of course. And one very good argument we have there is that all the great big religions in the world have some country around the world where their people are a minority. And they are behaving quite differently when they are a minority than when they are a majority. And that is something that we can use quite often. Because a Christian here, with a state church, behaves quite differently than a Christian which is a small minority in a Muslim country or a Hindu country, and vice versa. So that's interesting. But of course, many of our people has also been engaged in problems related to racial discrimination, caste, gender, sexual orientation, whatever. And sometimes we see that many of the same mechanisms are in place, because some of the discrimination of homosexuals, for instance, have the same kind of problems that we meet as non-religious. We are a small minority, we are viewed as strange in some ways, and we have to work in many of the same fashions to achieve the kind of acceptance that they have done. So we share some of the same problems, but also perhaps some of the same solutions. So that's interesting. And politics, democracy, government, and good governance, yes. Also really relevant for many of our groups. But again, not in general, but specific issues related to our basic problems. And war, conflict, terrorism, violence, peace, disarmament, nuclear weapons. We have a lot of declarations and things on this, but they are all very specific in time and place. So now the Oslo Declaration on Peace is an attempt to try to do something that's more general, more neutral. And you have been using some of these references in your work, so perhaps you could tell a little bit about how this can be used. I'll just say that we don't have this, there is no index on the website that you can go in and see, oh, I want to see all the resolutions on point number 8 here, population, reproductive health, and so forth. It's not organized that way. That's one of the things we want to achieve, but it isn't there. But you can use the search facility, and then you will find most of them, at least, there. So do not try to go and find this, but if there is some kind of issue in your country, in your organization, perhaps you can find something that is relevant and background for you there. I'll just let Matt give some examples, and we have the questions afterwards, okay?
And just to repeat, I think you will, but if you search on any of those terms on our website, it will bring up a list of all the statements. It may include unofficial statements and stories, but you will get all the information there. From my perspective in the work I do, one of the ways I find these statements most useful is when I'm trying to forge alliances with other organizations. And when I'm working at the UN or elsewhere, and I want to work with Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International or a lesbian, gay group, or any organization that may have some overlap with us. They're not humanists, but they have a single issue or a range of concerns where there's an overlap. It's very useful to be able to show them, first of all, that humanist organizations agree with them. And secondly, I find it's very useful to say, not only do we support, for example, lesbian and gay rights, but we've been supporting them since the 1950s. because a lot of these issues, the humanists have been in the forefront and have taken a stance that was very unpopular and certainly very much a minority viewpoint at the time. And now it's quite commonplace. In a sense, we've been successful in bringing most of society around to a lot of our viewpoints. But it's valuable to be able to show that humanists have championed these issues, have taken a stand, even when that stand was unpopular and perhaps even dangerous. So I think it's very useful to be able to point to these common positions when working with other groups. And that may also extend to when working with politicians. If you know they have a track record of concerns, they may not come out and say they're not religious, they may not want to be described as a humanist. But if you look at the issues they're concerned with, and compare it to our list, you may find there's a huge overlap. And you can use that to emphasize the common ground and the shared values, and use that as a basis for working together. So I strongly recommend you look at what the IHEU has and what we say. I don't know, are you going to go on?
Just take questions.
One thing I wanted to encourage you all to do is to go to the IHEU website and look up the Amsterdam Declaration of 2002. And that is the most recent and most comprehensive statement of humanism and its beliefs, goals, and aspirations. And it can be printed off on one-page sheet and handed out to people. And it's a great and positive summary of what we believe in and what we're working for. So I do recommend you refer to that. Go to IHEU.org and just type in Amsterdam Declaration 2002. And I hope you'll put that on your own websites, or at least link to it, because it's a very useful summary of our broad principles and the things we're working for. Okay?
Thanks. We take some questions now, and then just have a short conclusion remark afterwards. Yes, please.
Yes. Actually, it's not a question, it's just a comment.
Okay.
I found your classification in 13 groups very useful because unfortunately or fortunately, if I can create the word, humanism is a broad life stance. So inevitably, we must have at least a general idea of any of those 13 groups of questions, as the organized religions have. Sorry. Of course, we do not have to be a catch-all organization, having the specific response or answer for every single issue, but general statements or general ideas based on a broad notion of human rights, because human rights are not only the elementary right to life, for instance, so many times threatened, as in my country during the dictatorship, the very right to life, for instance, or not to be tortured by the state. But the social, economic, and political rights, they are also included in a broad notion of human rights. So it is, I think it is good to have a general position on that. I'm not surprised by the fact that the members of the Norwegian Humanist Association are more likely than the general population to be part also of such organizations as the Amnesty International, because being a humanist is being engaged for humanism, for a better life for everyone. So it's not surprising in a way. And I think that at least, for instance, this Oslo Declaration of Peace, I find it very useful because different churches or different religions have, or some segments of it, have their fellow of reconciliation. They are Christian fellow of reconciliation, and they work together in a sense of macro-ecumenical way. And I think that's important. We should contribute to those with our own humanist perspective, trying to find of common ground with people, because those Christians, for instance, the Fellow of Reconciliation, they can fight against the fanatic strands into their own religion. So we must to help that people to strengthen inside their respective religion and having in common these human rights. And well, that's all I wanted to say in this particular moment. But I have another point, but better later.
Thank you very much. Babu.
My comment is triggered by point number 9, Raj, where you were talking of should we have something to say about the death penalty, torture, punishment, crime. I think because we come from this wide variety of backgrounds in humanism and in the societies we come from, our conception of humanism is in the minimal statement. But that does not constrain us to define humanism only by the minimal statement. That is a minimum. And I think our concept of humanizing of social institutions, as Roa said, many of these issues that have become human rights issues now, 40 years ago were statements by humans before others have thought about it. So I think the concept of humanizing social institutions started and is a unique domain of humanists, really. And all these, in fact, and I think 13 is too less. We must be having more. Because humanism is a philosophy for the human being. Philosophy of life for the human. And therefore, all that is human should not be foreign to humanism. However, in practical terms, in the IHEU framework, there is a minimal statement to which one has to adhere to become member of the IHEU. But the Amsterdam Statement is expansive. It covers all aspects of human life, in a sense, in what a one-page document can. In that sense, I think this fits in with the Amsterdam Declaration's ideas. And we will always be thinking ahead of the others on these important issues. You said the Oslo Declaration is very useful. I think its usefulness would be enhanced if the word disarmament is also added in there. The word disarmament is a very crucial thing to put, but because economy is involved in that. And a lot of exports happen from this part of the world to where we are trying to say there should be peace. One cannot be peace-loving at home and send arms abroad. So I think this disarmament issue also becomes very important.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
We can take a few more questions on this, but we cannot start discussing each of the themes. But so we go back to the principle of how we IHE make statements and what kind of statements we have. But you had a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Considering these statements, which are very important, particularly count 8, I talk about population reproductive health and rights, contraceptive and family planning. I've come to realize that the IHEU work holistically on a lot of issues that are important to human life. I really want to know what are some of the programs that are being implemented by IHEU specifically in Count 8 around the world. Because I see this as decent to us in Africa, because this is where the issues of reproductive and health issues are high. People get imprinted during the adolescent age, and we think the kind of programs are very important. So, what mechanisms are you planning in ensuring that some of the programs are sent down to Africa?
You know, this is an area where IHEU as an organization cannot really do much activity, because it's our member organizations who actually conduct programs and do activities here. But sometimes we try to support that kind of activity. And we can do that by giving references to them, giving them support in a mental way, if you want to, but also perhaps sometimes by supporting financially some of the programs or projects that are being done. And we know that quite a few of our member organizations are doing social work in this area related to victims of prostitution or rehabilitation from prostitution, HIV/AIDS support, and trying in many places to do a social work there that is not in any way related to the church or religion or government, so that we can be something else. And sometimes it's just important just to be a humanist, to actually be there and do something for these people because nobody else wants to have anything to do with them. So that's a big statement by itself. But the IHEU as an organization is very small, there's very small resources and very little we can do as such. So that's why statements is one thing, and then support for the member organizations and their activities, that's most important for us. A couple of more questions, and I think, okay, let's start with you.
One concern, I'm thinking about one of my committee members who, the reason she's not religious is because she doesn't like dogma. And isn't there a bit of a conflict between free thought and what I can see is necessary if you're in the UN, which is having a position statement, which is essentially these are. I mean, my guess is everybody in this room, if we read through all of these, we'll all find something we don't agree with. But how do you square the free thought dogma issue?
I think it's fairly easy, actually.
Yeah, I think first of all, we don't say it's dogma. We do have our core beliefs, such as non-belief in God, support for human rights. And you don't believe that, you're in the wrong group. But in terms of specific beliefs, for example, opposing a death penalty, when we make these statements, we say these views are the consensus of our humanist membership. We don't say they're required for membership. And we have members who are not opposed, who support the death penalty. And that's not grounds for them to be excommunicated, to use another religious word. I think it's important to point out we have shared values and shared principles, and these give rise to some policy statements, but those policy statements aren't required, they don't have to be imposed. And we accept that in many cases there'll be people who disagree, and often, and this is a point when it comes to making policy resolutions, while we may agree on broad principles, often the disagreement on these points is a matter of not agreeing on the facts. And, some people support the death penalty because they believe it's a deterrent, and others believe it isn't. And there's a legitimate debate about that, and humanists can legitimately disagree. So we have to be aware of not trying to make micro statements where there may be legitimate disagreement between humanists. And when we do make fairly broad statements of some of these issues, we should leave room and say this isn't required dogma. People can disagree. The important thing is the process by which we disagree. That we disagree based on reason and facts, and we argue peacefully, and we don't fight over it. That's more important than any specific statement.
And I think that you will find that most of these declarations or resolutions or whatever have a kind of wording that make them non-dogmatic. They are stating principles, and they are addressing some kind of issues about that. And dogmatism is when you don't want to change these. And I just told you that we have a policy commission to see if we have to change any of these. And if people come back and say, hey, what you said in 1962 isn't right anymore, then we can just change it. Yeah. So we can adapt to society, and that is the strength of humanism. That we don't have to say that, no, somebody wrote this 40 years ago, so we still have to meet it. We just have time for one final comment or question, and that's yours, sir.
My point is that humanism is a basis for human rights, and I understand. So there are four categories from the human rights perspective. The first thing is, if something is adverse to the human life, that is to be the issue of attack by humanists. The second is human dignity. I think many of the things covers, the dignity covers that. The third is equality, and the fourth is freedom. So within that four dimensions of human existence, I think these all issues are interrelated. So we should have to view it. I will just give you an example that, okay, in educating children, parents have, dominance according to Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If my father wants to make me Hindu, then okay, I should be Hindu type of thing. But there are some other dimensions in the child right evolution. There is a significant point is that, okay, respect the view of the child is there, which is a more advanced idea. So we can correlate things with human rights issues from our extent that we are humans. So always think, I think it is better to think that all human rights issues can be addressed, but the ground is to be humanism.
Thank you very much. And I'll just give you one example that even though we agree on a lot of principles and a lot of basic things here, we can disagree on how we should achieve those and how we should go around that, what the actual practices can be. So on Sunday in the Congress, there will be a panel discussion on whether humanists should do a military service or not. And we really don't agree on that, even if we agree on the principle that there shouldn't be death penalty and so forth. So there's a lot of differences between us, even so. And I think we have to conclude this session there. Our main idea with this is just to say to you that on the IHEU website you can find a lot of background information and these kind of resolutions. And some of them are old, so be a bit critical if you are trying to use them or in your own organizations. We will now Thank you. We'll now have a short coffee break again before we take the final session of the day.